The objective of this video is to explain what streams, headers, and boilerplates are. Inspiration for this came from RFC 7230 actually. I was just reading about HTTP and noticed in the very beginning it said, for further information on internet standards, see section 2 of RFC 5741. So I thought that was interesting to randomly have that reference to internet standards in an RFC document about HTTP, that protocol. So what I did is, like usual, copy and pasted that entire RFC here. And once I got to reading, I couldn't stop because it was just really interesting. This thing that I've dedicated myself to, that is reading RFCs, asking questions and making observations, so essentially commenting on requests for comments. This particular RFC just gives me a lot of details of how RFCs are created. And so to start with, it said this RFC is obsoleted by 7841, and so I went there and checked it out. It's less pages than this one, but by the time I had noticed this, I had already commented and written all over this, so we're going to go with this one for today. Maybe next time I'll go ahead and point out all the differences, but for now, let's see what they were saying in December of 2009. So the abstract reads, RFC documents contain a number of fixed elements such as the title, page header, standard boilerplates, and copyright IPR statements. So there's my first question that I do not know the answer to. What is an IPR statement? This document describes them and introduces some updates to reflect current usage and requirements of RFC publication. In particular, this updated structure is intended to communicate clearly the source of RFC creation and review. Alright, so what is RFC 5741 all about? The answer is to communicate clearly the source of RFC creation and review. And so if we read here under the status of this memo, it says something I thought was interesting. This document is not an Internet Standards Track specification. It is published for informational purposes, and you can see that up here as well. Oh, my bad. You can actually see it right here, but the RFC that obsoleted this one is also informational. And so I just kind of thought that was ironic that the document on how to write standards is itself not a standard. Maybe that's like writing a book, or cross-exat, writing a pamphlet on how to write a book. And then something I thought is crazy, later on, again, in the status of this memo section, you see documents approved for publication by the IAB are not a candidate for any level of internet standard. And then it tells you to see this RFC, so to see itself, but section 2 of itself. So that's why I titled this section 2, because this was the only reason I ended up here in the first place, is to see why the RFC on the HTTP protocol, well, I should say the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, an RFC on that was referencing this one. And I did get curious about what came after this, so 5742. So this one is all about handling independent submissions for RFC publication. So maybe I'll get to that one later as well. Okay, so scrolling down, there's the copyright notice, a little frustrating to me. I'm very curious if there has ever been a copyright-like case because somebody took something from an RFC they weren't supposed to. And then it's also interesting that it says code components extracted from this document must be included, or must include simplified BSD license text as described in section whatever. So it's funny that's there because we will know. That's funny that's there because we will not be seeing any code in this RFC at all. But I guess maybe for legal reasons they're just covering their bases and they put that in there. So scrolling down through the table of contents, I see that this is one of the shorter RFCs I've read. The introduction is pretty straightforward. To summarize, people are touchy over the approval process for a document to become an RFC. So that's what I got from the introduction. And now my reaction is actually, I'm just going to try to read more about RFCs before I form an opinion on this pickiness. Maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. Same with the copyright concept. I'll go ahead and hold off on having an opinion. Me being a professor at a community college, I am just usually stuck in the theory and the words of things versus the actual building of them. Which, speaking of being stuck in the words of things, it says most of the historical structure information is collected from RFC 2223. So that whole historic structure of an RFC, that would be interesting to learn about. However, for the sake of this series, I'm going to try to just keep looking at more technical RFCs. So what is a stream when they say RFC streams and internet standards? Well, first they tell us not everything's going to be a standard. That is also an RFC. Then they say that the Ietf also produces non-standards track documents. Okay, so here they give us some detailed types of non-standards. So what are 3 examples of non-standard documents? However, all documents published as part of the Ietf stream are reviewed by the appropriate Ietf bodies. So just using context clues, a stream is where the RFC comes from. And we saw that when we looked at that RFC 5742, that there is an independent stream that people can use to get an RFC published. So that might be a great question if you're ever out there at a coffee shop, you meet somebody who says they're an author of an RFC, and there are a lot of them out there. So hopefully this is a reasonable question. You could say, what stream did you publish from? Did you go through the Ietf? Did you go through the IAB? Here's a couple other streams, the IRTF or the Independent Submission stream. Now it says here that documents published in streams other than the Ietf stream are not generally reviewed by the Ietf for such things as security, congestion control, or inappropriate interaction with deployed protocols. Okay, so that tells me you could rely on the Ietf to review concepts related to security, congestion control, or inappropriate interaction, with protocols. So the question is, what can we rely on the Ietf to review? Oh, and here's the English teacher in me pointing out that instead of the word things, the author of this document should have said something like topics or subjects. I think topics may have been the best choice right there. And so another takeaway from this paragraph is just the idea that when you're writing an RFC, you might want to check out what stream it comes from. I wonder if that's on the very top of the document. Well, I do see this, so is it safe to assume that is the stream it went through? Or the point is, if you're reading something about security and it went through the Ietf stream, it might be more reliable than if it came from another stream. I wish I knew of RFC expert. I have searched around online to find something. If you guys know anything, go ahead and leave it in the comments. But from the moment I started teaching about RFCs in my AP computer class years ago, I really got fascinated by them and found them to be a great source of information, rather than the typical Wikipedia article or Stack Overflow answer. So at the end here, it says, therefore the Ietf disclaims for any of the non-Ietf stream documents any knowledge of the fitness of those RFCs for any purpose. Alright, so there's our little disclaimer. It's kind of cool. I never saw the word disclaim used in a sentence. But after this disclaimer, they go and ask us to refer to a couple more RFCs, literally, again, itself right here. And so before we dig more into itself, I just wanted to throw this out there. Can anyone find examples of non-Ietf RFCs for me to read? That could just be like an extra credit opportunity in class where you just throw some at me, not including this one itself, which appears to come from the IAB. So there's a good question. Can we for sure rely on the top of an RFC to tell us what stream that RFC is coming from? Okay, so section 3 is just all about the structure of the RFC. Title page information right there. Forgive my formatting problems here, but you get the gist of it. You have a document source, the author name, the RFC number itself, the author's affiliation. That was really wise, I think, to include it. You have a subseries ID, so I think that's at ISSN. Yep, ISSN number. It's just like a serial numbering thing, which it confuses me. I thought the RFC number would be a good enough number to assign a document like this. Then it looks like we'll have some relationship information, which is helpful, especially the whole concept of things being obsoleted by another thing. And then the category of that RFC. And it just says month year here, but I assume that is the month and the year, like we saw on the top, December 2009. That's just the month and year of its publication. And I want you to notice on that other site, you could go to this data tracker and see changes that have occurred to the RFC. But I wish it was like GitHub when I click on the previous version, if it could just show in red and show in green what was added and subtracted. That'd be great. Okay, so here we have a example, like an exact example of what they're asking for right here. Scrolling down, it says the right column contains author name. Okay, so actually it just says everything that we could see. Historically, all RFCs were labeled Network Working Group, but that's historically. And what that did is it referred to the original version of today's Ietf, when people from the original set of ARPANET sites and whomever else was interested in these meetings got together to discuss. So that is some cool history right there. So I just wrote here, how did RFCs come to be? Well, they came to be when people who worked at ARPANET sites got together to discuss, and design and document proposed protocols. And that reminds me to ask you a good question. If you're watching this video, I take it you're here to learn. Anyone who may already know this stuff really well might not be watching. If they are, please correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But check this out. What is the relationship between protocols and software? When I was first learning of these topics, I struggled understanding that relationship. But the point is, I had learned that software is implementing protocols. That protocol is the way to do something, and software makes the thing work that way. If I have software downloaded on a router to make a router work, I'm using protocols that we've agreed on, such as how IP addresses work. I use a routing algorithm. So these guys in the early days are meeting and designing the protocols. Now it's up to the modern creators and code maintainers to make sure those protocols are being upheld. And look at that, RFC number 3. That is a very long time ago. And now that we know all RFCs have a month and date of publication on there, we can check out exactly how long ago that was. So here we are, April 1969. Oh, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole though. Let's focus. It says here, as in this RFC, I assume, we obsolete the term network working group in order to indicate the originating stream. Oh, check that out. I am correct. Document source is going to indicate the originating stream. So now you have an answer. Can we for sure rely on the top of the RFC, blah, blah, blah? Yes. If it was confusing right there, it is not confusing right here when it says that the document source is the name of the RFC stream. Those two concepts are interchangeable. And then they give us a list of possible streams. So here's those 4, same as the one we saw when we took that little field trip to the RFC 78 something that obsoleted this one. I think independent submissions are particularly cool. I really want to look more into those, see what kind of independent submissions are being proposed. Now when you see the RFC number, this indicates the RFC number assigned by the RFC editor. So this makes me laugh as I imagine an editor sitting at a desk looking at a proposed RFC and then assigning it this number, like an inventory number. It just makes me think of Jonah Jameson from Spider-Man just sitting there looking at the RFC. And I wonder what the level of difficulty to get published is. So there you have it, Jonah Jameson, Editor-in-Chief. Well, to go on, some relations between RFCs in the series are explicitly noted in the RFC header. For example, a new RFC may update one or more earlier RFCs. So there you go. You have your updates, you have your obsoletes, you have your obsoleted by, which is very helpful. And they finish by saying that there are just other types of relationships, and I really specifically would like to know what that is. So a genuine question right there. What are other types of relationships RFCs can have? Okay, so we covered categories. Again, forgive some of the formatting on here. Since we're still in section 3, this is still about the structure of an RFC, so in the first paragraph of one. And so this is hilarious. In the first paragraph, you should have a clear sentence that stands out. A clear single sentence. Alright, so are they trying to dissuade us from using commas? I guess for good reason. They might dissuade you from starting with a question. These are, after all, technical documents, not editorial pieces. Oh, I see. They're going to really micromanage your first sentence. You either need to say that it is an internet standard, or it should say this memo documents an internet best practice. Another option would be this document is not an internet standard track specification, and then say it is published for other purposes. Maybe because of these angle brackets, you're supposed to specifically say the purpose in there. So let's check out one of my favorite RFCs, 8391, about this Merkle signature scheme. It's one of my favorites because it's supposed to help us survive post-quantum computers. Okay, I'm going to scroll down till I find that first paragraph. Okay, maybe introduction doesn't count as a first paragraph because it says a cryptographic digital signature scheme provides message authentication. Asymmetric message authentication, that is. Alright, so quite a long introduction. Oh, there we go. So actually above the introduction is the word status of this memo, and here we go. It says this document is not an Internet Standards Track specification. It is published for informational purposes. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. When they say first paragraph, they must mean status of this memo. Just to double check, here's the HTTP RFC. And yep, this is an Internet Standards Track document. And I'm glad I'm curious, because I just checked this other RFC 1034 about a domain, well, DNS. I guess the official title is Domain Names, Concepts, and Facilities. And here they say this RFC is an introduction to the domain name system and omits many details which can be found in the companion. So 1035 is where I'd have to go. This RFC assumes that the reader is familiar with the concepts discussed in this memo. Oh, but this is 1034, and we're reading 5741. So maybe RFCs before this they were not following this protocol, and get it? A writing protocol instead of a networking or other type of protocol, or technical type of protocol, that is. Alright, so there's a paragraph 1, some more examples for you to read if you cared. A paragraph 2. This is where you're supposed to describe the type of review and exposure the document has received up to the moment. And then here's all the details of that paragraph 2 of the status of the memo. What I found interesting is in paragraph 2, for example, if it's the IAB stream, it might say something like, this document is a product of the Internet Architecture Board and represents information that the IAB has deemed valuable to provide for permanent record. So they say all that, while the IESG says it has been approved for publication by the Internet Steering Group. And that's all. Keep it short and sweet right there. So first of all, just such a difference between the different streams. Second of all, they specifically want to make sure that if there has not been a consensus call, then this right here is what it's supposed to read, which what I had just read to you is nowhere close to, hey guys, this is not a consensus call. Or there has not been a consensus call. Which, if I'm digesting this correctly, I mean we want a consensus on protocols, or we want consensus on information. So why not just say that instead of this very confusing, legally sounding thing? But look at me, I've read like 10 RFCs in my life, and here I am going on about how they need to improve. Sorry, no disrespect intended. But this does spark my curiosity. I wonder exactly how different these organizations are to each other. I make the joke here that, is it like the Jets versus Sharks, where are these guys territorial, are they judgmental? I mean, they're humans, they probably are both of those. Just to what extent is an interesting question I'd like answered. But this last sentence makes a lot of sense, that this RFC represents a consensus of, and you put the name of the people, or the group. Or alternatively, you could say this RFC represents the individual opinion of one or more members. Okay, so that's what I was saying. So, sure, be very specific as to who is standing behind the RFC, and that's kind of funny. Maybe that's just giving us somebody we could specifically blame, or even worse, worship. Hero worship is no good in a society. But let's keep this moving. Paragraph 3, the boilerplate ends with a reference to where further relevant information can be found, so that's very nice. More than just like citations like you'd find on Wikipedia. Regarding the concepts of adding notes, they're basically saying in previous RFC there were notes, but we're really trying to get away from those. So no more notes. Here's that copyright information I'm so curious about. Over here they talk about that ISSN number. I'm still wondering why. Why are we numbering something that has a number like RFC? I'm going to start speeding this up so we could finish here. Looks like this is the structure for informative references. And just seeing the word subcommittee makes me ask, like, how many RFCs on RFCs are there? I mean, this is the structure of how to include informative references. Over here is the structure for normative references. I could appreciate, though, that their desire is to keep things consistent. People like myself who are just reading through these are so maybe rare. Funny to see so many of these references also refer to other RFCs. So there we go, just plenty of examples. I don't know why they give us so many examples. And then this one seems so random. All these other ones are about how to write RFCs, or the RFC editor itself. Alright, so we have Appendix A. So here's some boilerplates. We can scroll down pretty quickly. in the boilerplate is that section 2 of RFC 5741. I said, yep, like that's the whole reason we're reading this one. So, okay, people can do a lot of copying and pasting in order to publish an RFC. For anyone looking for extra credit out there, go and write your own RFC. You may not be in my class, but I will give you extra credit. Maybe create a little gradebook in an Excel spreadsheet and put your name there and put some extra points right next to it. But wow, what an interesting RFC on writing RFCs.